Hi, everyone. Welcome to Work for Humans. This is Lindsley. Today, I'm sharing a rebroadcast of me being interviewed by Tim Fitzmaurice on his show, The Cutting Edge, on the public radio station KSQD. Tim's a poet. He teaches writing at the University of California, and he's the former mayor of Santa Cruz. He's a deep humanistic thinker on a lot of topics, and so I always love talking to him, and he runs an interesting show. So this isn't my usual podcast format. It's me being interviewed instead of interviewing somebody else. I think of it as bonus material for anybody who's interested in some of the ideas animating Work for Humans. We talk about my current job, some of the stranger jobs I've had in the past, and importantly, we talk about the genesis of the Work for Humans podcast and the management philosophy behind it. We also talk about the reimagining of work that's currently taking place worldwide, as well as some other fun topics. If you enjoy this episode, please remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, enjoy my conversation with Tim Fitzmaurice on his show, The Cutting Edge, on the public radio station KSQD.
Thank you for listening to KSQD 91.7 and ksqd.org online. You're listening to The Cutting Edge with Tim Fitzmaurice. Today, my guest is Dart Lindsley, and he's going to tell us what his job is and all those kinds of things. But what I want to talk about is the fact that we've been friends for many years. We started off just chatting about Finnegan's Wake at Merrill Coffee Shop, which has now been torn down. And but I think that tells you a little bit about him. He's a person who's always trying to crack the code, and he's about to come out with a podcast. It's called Work for Humans.
Yeah, it's called Work for Humans. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're going to get around to that and discuss that in a moment, but I think I'd like to start with what are you doing these days? What is the work that you're doing?
So I have a day job, and I have the sort of unday job. Mm-hmm. My day job is, my official title is I'm the manager of global process excellence for people operations at Google. Mm-hmm. And that's a long, it's been a long path to get here from where you and I first met, because when you and I first met, I was in the writing program at UCSC, and I was a writer for 10 years, and I taught writing. Mm-hmm. But when my family, when we had twins, I got into business, and I started working through different aspects of business. Yeah. And this is where I've ended up. So that's my day job.
Right.
But throughout all of this, I have kept, I would say, sort of a third-party observer's view of the things that I do in business. And through a number of different careers that I've been through, I've come to believe that we are getting the idea of employment wrong and work wrong. Mm-hmm. And so the podcast and other things that I do are about getting it right.
You've had a lot of jobs. I remember you when you were a detective. You were a private detective for a while. And, living over here, you're in Santa Cruz, and you were living off Delaware or something like that.
That's right. I was a criminal defense investigator, and I worked for the alternate public defender's office.
Uh-huh. So you've been through a lot of processes, and you've paid attention to a lot of the way people work in the world. And now you're working for Google. Say the name of that job title again. Why does it have to be so complicated?
Well, it has to be complicated. Okay, so first of all, the thing is that you generally get to make up your own job title. Oh, and so I thought the word global sounded big, and so I'm the manager of global, because it sounds big, process excellence, because that's actually what we do, which is my team helps improve HR processes, basically. Mm-hmm. So we provide a service inside Google and help to make that run better. So global process excellence.
Mm-hmm. But basically it's HR. It's human relations.
Yes.
And so do you have something to do with people getting hired, or just talking about how they get hired?
You know what? If somebody doesn't like how any process in HR is working, it could be hiring. So let's say it's going too slow, or let's say it's too expensive, or let's say we think it's risky. My team can help you to make that better. Right. That's what we do.
Well, that's a remarkable job. And but I think we want to get away from that for a little bit and talk about your side tracks, because I think interesting thing about your life and your thought is the side tracks that you've taken. You come out, incidentally, this is a program that's fundamentally based on UCSC. You come out as a graduate of UCSC into the world, right?
Yep, I graduated. What I say when I speak about it is I say I went to UCSC and I studied everything. But I eventually graduated after 7 years, I think, with a degree in creative writing and literature.
We were talking earlier about what the nature of work is, as far as you've been able, you've done 10 podcasts already, you've recorded them, you've talked to people about work. Tell me what that experience has been like.
So when I first started this podcast, I was thinking that I wanted to talk about my own ideas, which is I'm going to get on and I'm going to tell everybody what I think. And my producer, which is Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio, he says, don't do that. And he said, one thing, it's very hard to actually produce that kind of material quickly. The second thing he said is nobody knows who you are. What you need to do is you need to interview people who are actually known in the community, who actually then can help to spread the word. And so what I decided to do was interview my own bibliography. By doing that, I'm actually going into some of the people I've been reading for years who've really influenced my thought, and I'm calling them up and I'm talking to them about my topic, which is the experience of work.
And so what did you discover from these conversations that you had?
Well, more than anything, what I'm developing is a vocabulary, which is that there are all of these concepts around work. In fact, even today, I was getting a vocabulary with you talking about work, which is the difference between work, which can be great, and drudgery, which is sort of by definition not. Well, now we've got this distinction around drudgery versus work, and it's super useful. But I have learned it's essentially it's a toolkit of concepts that are useful. And like one example is I had never heard of the idea of an incomplete contract, which is that if I'm going to tell you if you work for me and I'm going to tell you what your job is, I cannot possibly describe all of your job in a contract, because there's this huge part of your job which requires judgment and is going to be dealing with novel events, no matter what your job is. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is employers try to describe job very, very specifically, and they're basically trying to tell you how to do your work, but it's impossible. And so what always happens is that we form incomplete contracts, and the only thing that fills that gap is your goodwill to do good work. Mm-hmm. And if I squelch that, and if I limit you to the contract that I'm telling you to do, then you're going to do less good work. Mm-hmm. Teachers face this all the time.
Yeah.
So those are the sorts of things I'm learning. Just deep concepts and slowly parting them together, and it makes me smarter every day.
Mm-hmm. Earlier, we spoke about the experience of work, and you had a question about hiring your job or something like that you asked people, which is a complicated question because I couldn't immediately answer it at all. But how did that question go?
Yeah, let me describe the question.
Okay.
And then I can describe how people answer it a little bit.
Yeah, that would be good.
And then I can say why I asked the question.
Okay.
But that's a fairly long dissertation. So the question I ask is, what job do you hire your job to do for you? And whenever I ask that question, people kind of lean back and they say, what job do I hire my job to do for me? And I say, yeah, your job hires you to do something for them. What do you hire your job to do for you? And they think about it for a little while. And some of the things that they say are somewhat expected, which is I hire my job to, pay my bills. I hire my job to make money. And you say, well, why do you need to make money? And they say, well, I need to make money to take care of my family. I need to feed everybody. I need to protect my retirement. I need money so that I can buy other experiences. So some of it's money. Right. But even money is not money. Money is these other things. Then they say, well, I hire my job to learn, which you might expect. But then as you get deeper and deeper, you find these more and more subtle things that people want. Some people say, I hire my job to give me puzzles to solve. These are people who solve puzzles in their spare time, and their job is actually a conduit for great puzzles. People say, I hire my job to give me a worthy opponent, because they like to compete head-to-head with others. I hire my job to discover the unknown. I hire my job to invent the uninvented. I hire my job to pay my debts. And the first person who ever said that to me, I said, you mean your student debts? And he said, no, I mean, my grandmother worked weekends to put me through college, and I owe to her this work that I do. Some people say, I hire my job to get out of the house. when you get deeper into that, they say, I actually don't need to get out of the house, but my spouse needs me to get out of the house at least some part of the day. Or my home life is difficult. I've got elders at home, or I have children, or step parents or something. Right. I hire my job to structure my life. There was a writer that I read right when we first met who said, somebody asked him, why do you write? He says, I write to pass the time. And so there's all these different reasons. One person said, basically, I hire my job to give me a stage. And he says, I like to, in the morning, I like to dress up in a VP costume, a vice president costume, and I like to go to work and pretend to be a vice president. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, you are a vice president. And he says, no, I'm actually a jazz musician.
I see.
And I learned to love the stage, and I need an adoring audience. Wow. So that's the kind of and this list is long. It's 30 different things long that people are looking for from work.
I don't know why the idea of the imposter syndrome comes up in my mind, that some people, when they go into work and the things that they do, they feel like they're not qualified to do that.
This is actually something that's come up, which is, so recently I interviewed somebody named Susie Wise, who wrote a book called Design for Belonging. And in it, one of the things we talked about in this interview is that we both felt when we started a new job that we didn't belong. And the transition for us from not belonging to belonging was the moment when we could provide our unique value. And people recognized that unique value. Although, let me modify that. Other people did not necessarily have to recognize that value, but we had to know that we'd provided some value. And so there is a way in which we feel like we need to earn belonging. And so this imposter syndrome is, to some extent, it's this feeling like we are being excluded and there are ways in, and those ways in to some extent have to do with being able to bring our unique value.
That totally reminds me of strangely, things like The Invisible Man, where people are structurally invisible, where in the case of The Invisible Man, it's because of race. But I see my students, 18-year-olds at the university, as currently between being a child and being, that adult and all that. Right in that betweenness is a kind of structural invisibility or difficulty to sort of nail down exactly who you are at that particular moment. And so you're sort of seeing work or beginning a job as a way of figuring out finding your way into the structure of something. And that's a really important journey, because it could be misbegotten. It could be something that you go in the wrong direction, as well as something that is positive.
Somebody who's here, who lives in the neighborhood, is Dave Evans. Dave Evans wrote a book called Designing Your Life. And in it, essentially what he and somebody else at Stanford argues is that you should always rapid prototype career, which is don't spend 8 years getting a medical degree to find out that you hate being a doctor. It's basically use design principles to figure your way into a place that's actually going to be a fit for you. He's 2 blocks from here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we all go into a situation where we're actually inventing ourselves after we've taken the job, And I certainly felt it teaching at the university. I felt it when I was elected to office. I thought, I'm not prepared for this. It's going to take me 4 years of being in office to figure out how to do it. It's like getting your degree and then now you got your 4 years education ahead of you. You have to educate yourself on it. And so I think that's the process of life. And if you can do that with an optimism instead of with a sense of the imposter, of a sense of I don't deserve it, that's an important kind of confidence to bring to what you're doing.
The reason I'm asking this question, what job do you hire your blank to do for you? That's a marketing question. And it's a question that was popularized by somebody named Clayton Christensen, a Harvard marketing professor. And the point of it is that if I really want to know what you want from a product, I shouldn't ask you how to design the product. I should ask you what you want to get done with it. And if I can really understand what you want to get done with that product, I can make a better product for you. Mm-hmm. I'm asking marketing questions of work. And the reason I'm doing that is that the entire history, and this is where I think we got it wrong, the entire history of human resources, of employment, is that the workforce is an input to production. And that as an input to production, Everything is about how do I procure that input and how do I maintain that input to production such that it is productive and it at a reasonable cost. And so that entire framing has missed an incredibly essential point. And that is that I believe employees are customers. We have limited time, so I won't go into the definition of a customer, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that a customer exchanges value with your enterprise and is free not to. And it's that freedom that's really, really important. All the other inputs to production, like capital equipment, real estate, raw materials, do not have freedom. You buy them, you own them, you control them. But people, unlike all of those things, do have freedom. They have freedom to take the job, leave the job, or just this hour, ignore the job. And so this misconception, very industrial age misconception of what people are in relation to work has led us to forget human agency. With a customer, you don't just buy a customer and own a customer. With a customer, you win them every day. You need to deeply understand what it is they want from a particular product. And I believe that work is a product that every company needs to design and build better to sell that product to employees who are subscribers.
Right. I'm going to interrupt and just say that we were talking earlier about the anti-work movement. It came out of an Italian thought, 20 years ago, the refusal of work. In other words, people, you mentioned the difference between work and drudgery. So there's something to be, maybe we're refusing drudgery, but there is right now, people are not taking the jobs that are available, or there's people that are resisting going back into work in the same way they were before the pandemic.
Yeah. And here's what's really interesting about that is that you'll hear people on the business side saying people are so entitled and saying things like people are lazy. Why don't they want to come back to work? Now, if you recognize them as a customer and work as a product, you'd be asking a completely different question. You'd be asking, what is wrong with this product that I can't get anybody to buy it? Mm-hmm. Apparently, I built a product that not enough people want. And so you would never say of a customer, they're so entitled. You'd never say of a customer, they're not buying my product because they're too lazy. Mm-hmm. What you'd say of a customer is, I need to think differently about this product that I'm selling.
Yeah. It's interesting because, of course, I connected up with Negri and Italian Marxism and all of that kind of thing. And there's a sort of late capitalist notion that somehow we're programmed to get into jobs. That you're sort of suggesting that we have freedom in the job that we take. And I think to a large extent those kinds of choices are there. But we also have compulsion to work, and a lot of people are compelled to do work and jobs that, when I was doing minimum wage jobs for 12 years, I didn't feel necessarily that I had a lot of choices about what I was going to be doing in those jobs.
I think people have way more choice than they give themselves credit for. Now, admittedly, there are parts of the economy where that's not the case. Mm-hmm. There's a big gap between, I think, what the amount of freedom people think they have and the amount of freedom that they do have. Mm-hmm. There's two kinds of freedom, actually. The one kind of freedom is to select the kind of work that you're going to do. But the second kind of freedom is how you interpret the work. We were talking earlier, and we were talking about drudgery. And I said, yeah, washing the dishes. And you said, no, washing the dishes is not drudgery because it's a time when I get to think. I get to think and I get to look out the window and I see the sky, and it's like a Zen moment for me. Well, it's probably possible for me to take on that understanding of it. I think if I looked at dishes differently, I might be able to do that. That was something which I'm probably going to misquote William James on, which was, he said, one of the great understandings of this century was that we have control over how we perceive the world. There's all these little things about it, which is, for instance, drudgery. I have a long commute to work when I actually commute to work. Mm-hmm. So I asked myself, do I have any freedom to make that less, bad? Well, I integrated riding an electric unicycle. So I now ride an electric unicycle for 10 miles a day as a part of my commute. It's terrifying. Not drudgery, though. And so it's just, there's a million examples like that.
Are you going to Google in San Jose or something?
Yeah.
That's a dangerous place to be riding along the road sometimes.
All bicycle trails.
All bicycle, okay.
And probably thank you for the bicycle trails that you helped make.
Well, yeah, okay. I had my moment. But I think there has been an attempt to reimagine work, and I think, I see my students living in this virtuality, that I think they hope there's going to be a re-examining work. But I think you just spoke about having to show up, and people don't necessarily want to show up for work these days, right?
Right. And the feeling there is, the way I say it is that the frog jumped out of the boiling water and doesn't want to jump back in.
All right.
You get so accustomed to, I imagine the Dutch in their wooden shoes got really accustomed to walking around in wooden shoes. Mm-hmm. One day, leather shoes came along, and they were like, I'm never going back to those wooden shoes. Mm-hmm. I think it's like that. I think you get accustomed to.
So the pandemic may have accustomed people to distances and remoteness.
It put them in leather shoes.
Put them in leather shoes at a different comfort level.
Yeah.
Tell me about your podcast. It's going to be released at the end of August?
End of August.
On all the different podcast?
All the different platforms. And the reason it's called Work for Humans is that the history of human resources has been, and of people at work, has been finding humans for work. Mm-hmm. And so it is about work for humans, and it's about how do we apply design principles to design the kind of work that will make people feel whole and alive.
But also writing a book. What's the name of the book?
Do you have
a name yet?
It's Work for Humans.
Work for Humans?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Work for Humans.
And you're also working on a collaboration with people at Stanford for your...
Much to my surprise. So I put parts of this book out online, and I was contacted by people at the Stanford D School, which is the School of Design at Stanford, saying that they'd like to make it a part of the curriculum there.
Excellent.
And now the University of Toronto is starting up a service design program, and they're talking about having it be a part of the curriculum there, which was a pretty strange experience. You put stuff online, but you don't expect people to read it. I actually told them, I said, it's like somebody's broken the lock on my diary and is reading my personal stuff. But it's exciting to see.
Mm-hmm. At this point, are you trying to redesign your own career again?
I totally am. Mm-hmm. And so this is a really good example of how much control I think we do have over our work. I am about 8 months from stopping working for money. So I'm still going to work. So to some extent, creating a podcast is designing the work that I want to have. Mm-hmm. As I look at, what it's going to look like for me to stop working for money, I look at what my father did, which is that my father was a professor emeritus at the University of California, San Diego. When he was 62, he stopped work. But as an emeritus, he then went to the lab for 30 years. The university gave him a bench. They gave him a $100 stipend. And for 30 years, he did research. His last paper was when he was 90. And that paper has actually informed how we're trying to defeat malaria in the world. Mm-hmm. And so work versus drudgery. Work's fabulous. The way work is delivered to us is not great. The way that we acquire work is not great. Mm-hmm. But work itself. So I want to make a distinction between work and job. Mm-hmm. So one way to say that I'm going to stop working for money is that I'm going to stop having a job, but I'm going to continue to work. And then the question is how do I want to frame it? And I ask myself my own question, which is, what job do I hire my job to do for me? Mm-hmm. I hire my job to discover the unknown. Right. And I can do that a lot of different ways besides job. Right. My whole philosophy of work is that nobody wants the same thing. I mean, there are recurring patterns, but even among those 30 things, it's combination of those 30 things. And then even if somebody says, I hire my job to give me puzzles, you start to interview them, you find out that they like completely different kinds of puzzles. One person likes a little Rubik's Cube kind of puzzle, and somebody else likes a big greenfield, solve hunger kind of puzzle. Mm-hmm. And so I actually see the job of employers is all about creating, understanding what you want from work and creating as bespoke a work design for you as is feasible mm-hmm. in the business. Right. And in fact, I think it's one of the mistakes of the history of work is that because we were so fascinated with creating productivity in the workforce, we were trying to essentially categorize people and to classify people into job roles and titles and things like that so that we could essentially manage them at scale. But the truth is that as a customer, each of us wants something very specific. I would actually recommend to anybody who is about to make that transition that you ask yourself what you hire your job to do for you. And so here's a way to do that, which is I actually have a website which has a survey on it, it's called letsredesignwork.com. You can go there and you can take the survey, and as a part of that, you'll see all of the different ways that people have answered this question. But people are often surprised about what they are getting from work when they don't have it anymore. I happen to like Excel spreadsheets. I like solving problems in Excel spreadsheets. It's kind of fun because you know what? I'm good at it. Mm-hmm. And there was a line in a book that Monsieur Levere is the name of the book. And it starts off, my hand doing this, which is he's talking about the writing of the actual story. And it's my hand doing this. Sometimes it is just a joy to see your hands whittling a stick and to experience your hands whittling a stick. That stick may have no purpose in the world, but the work itself can hold joy. And so different people have different needs about what they want from work. Yeah. And if you really understand that, when you make a transition either from one job to another or from a job into retirement, I think you can design a better life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for listening to KSQD 91.7. This is The Cutting Edge with Tim Fitzmaurice, and we're talking with Dart Lindsley about his new podcast, which is coming out at the end of the month, and it's Work for Humans. So I hope you'll look that up. Thank you, Dart.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim.